I hate it when God's silent. Like, it makes me feel like he isn't paying attention to me. It makes me feel like he might not even care. But today we're going to see that that's not true at all. Even in God's silence, we are going to learn that he is working behind the scenes to get all the pieces in place for his perfect timing. Join us today to see how this plays out in Luke. All right, good morning. Welcome to our new series, sort of new series. This is lesson 3. We're calling it Bite-Sized Lessons in Luke, okay? And this is for those of you who have about 15 minutes, not an hour, to watch a Bible study. So we're going to break down Luke in small little sections. So that's what we're doing here. Today I want to just begin with a story, and I want to encourage those of you that have teenagers or grandchildren who are teenagers, and you're frustrated with them. And you're frustrated because they do things that you're like, I never taught you to do that. I taught you not to do that. Why are you doing those things? And so I have to tell you a funny story about Dusty. This was about 13 years ago, all right? Dusty was a teenager back then. And looking back, what I thought was a big deal isn't a big deal at all. So I'm kind of hoping today will give you peace about your teenagers, because Dusty grew up, and so will your teenager. So I want you to know that there's hope for that. So here's my little story. Dusty is about, I think must have been about 13 years old at the time. And he wanted his ears pierced, okay? Now, we decided to pick our battles. This wasn't one of them that we were going to, go nuts on. But since Dusty played basketball, that was kind of what he did, I told Rob, let's tell Dusty that he can get his ears pierced if he can find 10 NBA basketball players that have their ears pierced. And Rob laughed and he goes, I think they all have their ears pierced. I was like, okay, well, that didn't work. So Dusty and Cheyenne and I go off to Walmart, and he picks out these adorable, fake, square diamond earrings, okay? I literally whined the entire time. And here was what I said. Earrings are for girls. In my day, like, the only people who wore earrings, men, were gay. Like, that was just the culture that I was raised in. And I just went on and on and on. And finally, Cheyenne looked at me and she said, could you please encourage him? And I'm like, why? Like, remind me again why I need to encourage my 13-year-old boy who plays basketball, why he should wear fake diamond earrings. Like, I just didn't get it at all. Which then took me to the, I'm too old for this, I'm too old to have children, you know, how we always get like that. So he gets his ears pierced, and he keeps asking me how he looks. And I never had the right words to say, like, I don't know, you kind of look like a girl. I mean, how does it feel, Dusty, to just follow the crowd? Like, that's what I wanted to say. My thought was, hopefully, that the earrings would just annoy him enough that he would just take them out. But here we are, about, 12, 13 years later. And the good news is that the earrings are gone. Dusty has a business degree. He's on his way to applying for dental school. And so what I learned from this is not to take life so serious, okay? Your teenagers will grow out of whatever they're going through in their life. And I'm not even sure why I told you that story, except I feel like somebody probably listening needs to hear that today, because kids do grow up, and that's good news. Sometimes it takes more time than we would like, and today we're talking about, kind of timing, and so we'll kind of hopefully mesh that together. Let's pick it up in Luke. This week we're going to start with verse 5, and we're going to kind of give you some of the players to Luke. Verse 5 is this: in the time of Herod, king of Judea. So I want to do a quick history lesson so you understand what's going on at the time when Jesus comes on the scene, when Jesus is born. So in the Old Testament, we know that the Old Testament is all about the nation of Israel. Okay, we know them today as the Jewish people. And from the lineage of this Jewish people would come Jesus, the Savior. So Genesis to Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament, is about God building this nation from one man, and his name was Abraham. Through his descendants would go the land of Israel, and they would be considered God's chosen people. Chosen because it would be through this line that Jesus would be born into. Now, of course, like I said, the Israelites, we know them as the Jews today. Now, we're just finishing up our Genesis series in our Wednesday Bible study, and we're at a place where Jacob just had to move to Egypt because of a famine. And that's where they stayed for 400 years. 400 years, stuck in Egypt, where eventually Moses will come on the scene, go get, Moses, will tell Pharaoh, let my people go, get the people out of Egypt. They'll wander in the land for 40 years and finally make it to the promised land, or Israel. And during this time, Moses, God told him to build a tabernacle. It's kind of like a portable church, let's just say it like that. But it was this portable tent, and they were to offer sacrifices and to worship, while they were wandering around the wilderness in 40 years. They hadn't made it into the land of Israel yet. They were just wandering in the wilderness, mostly because they were just brats, and they just continued to act like brats. And God's like, I'm not putting you in the land. We got some lessons to teach you. So how this tabernacle would work is that when God told the people to move, they would have to pack up the tabernacle and then just move it to another place where God told them. Now remember, everything in the Old Testament foreshadows Jesus. So this tabernacle, sacrifices, they had to, sacrifice lambs, for sin. That's it's foreshadowing what Jesus would end up doing. So ultimately, we know Jesus will be the one sacrifice. But like I said, all through the Old Testament, when you see things, they're foreshadowing what's to come in the New Testament. So eventually they get into the promised land. In about, 1000 BC, 1,000 years before Jesus, King David wants to build a permanent temple for God. He keeps seeing the portable temple. It's out there. He doesn't like that. He wants to build a big, magnificent, beautiful temple for God where people can, sacrifice. It could be like a beautiful worship place for the Israelites at that time. But David was kind of a man of war, and so God gave the task of building this big temple to his son Solomon. Now, there you've got it, 1,000 years before Jesus. You've got the temples built, but Israel, the nation of Israel, the people, turned their backs on God. And they kept following, false gods and worshiping, pagan idols and all this crazy stuff. And God said, enough's enough. And so God allowed the Babylonians to come in and destroy Solomon's big, beautiful temple. It was gone. And then they hauled the Israelites away to a foreign country. So that was 586 years before Jesus is born. Eventually, we read in the books of Nehemiah and Ezra, a smaller version of the temple was built. But between Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, and Luke, where we are, there's 400 years of silence. And like I said, I don't like silence. I don't like the silence of God. It makes me think he doesn't care. It makes me think he's not paying attention to me. But for this, the 400 years of silence, no prophets came on the scene. No word from God. No angels showing up with a message. Nothing. If you think God is silent, imagine for 400 years never hearing from him at all. And yet, what we see in Luke is that God was working all along. He was raising up all these nations and people and getting the stage set for the birth of the Savior, Jesus. And the Israelites had to wait 400 years for that. I was thinking about my niece, Nikki. Nikki, this is many, many years ago. Nikki had been engaged for like 3 years before they actually had the wedding. And for 3 years, there was so much going on. They were trying to plan the wedding. She was trying to finish school. There were so many things they wanted to get done before they actually got married. And so they were kind of in limbo. She wanted to finish nursing school. She wanted to get a job. They purchased a home, but they didn't get married or move in until after they were everything was in preparation for this big day. And so that's kind of, when I was thinking about this, that's what was going on during the 400 years. Everything had to be in place before that big day happened, just like the wedding. Everything had to be in place for them before the big celebration. And what happened for these 400 years of God's silence, he was working behind the scenes. He needed the right government in place. He needed the right king, Herod, to be in place. So let's stop for a second and talk about waiting. You may be listening and you may feel like God is nowhere around. I just had lunch with a friend of mine last week, and she said, God is silent. She needs to make a decision. She's not hearing from God. She doesn't know what to do. She's just like, he's nowhere. She goes, I feel like he doesn't even care. And I said, well, please know that that's not true. He does care. But unfortunately, waiting and silence, is kind of the norm for following Christ. His silence doesn't in any way mean that he isn't working behind the scenes. We just can't see it. So we're stuck not knowing. He knows exactly what he's doing. And we have to learn to trust him that he knows what he's doing, even in the silence. So here we are, 400 years, no word from God. The Roman government is ruling now. Many of the Jewish priests, are corrupt at this time. But God was in it the whole time. During the waiting, he was in it. Just like we were waiting for Dusty to get his stupid earrings out of his ear. We spent many, many years waiting for that, and it finally came to fruition one day. But for you, you may be waiting for a new job. You may be waiting on money to pay the bills. You might be waiting for a child to get off drugs, a marriage to get better. I just heard from someone who's waiting for finances for their ministry so that they can continue. But until they get finances, they're at a standstill. And I wrote back and I said, waiting on ministry is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Like, it's just really difficult because you're desperate to do something for Jesus, but you're kind of at a standstill. So I get that. But here's what I want to encourage you with. Please do not give up. Please do not give up on your faith. Do not give up praying. Do not give up trusting. Do not give up any of those things. What we learn from this 400 years of silence is that God really honestly is still working. Look at verse 5. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also descendants of Aaron. Okay, so we're getting the players here, okay? We know from Malachi that someone is going to come. Someone's coming to turn the hearts of the Israelites or the Jews back to their God. Okay, so we know that's going to happen. They know that, but they don't know what that looks like. And suddenly in Luke 5, we meet the three players, Herod, and we meet Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. So let's start first with Herod really quick. Herod was called Herod the Great, and he ruled over the region of the Jews. Now, when we studied Genesis, we saw that Abraham had a son, Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Okay, Jacob's descendants would be the lineage of Israel, the lineage of the Jews, the lineage of where Jesus would come from. Esau, the other brother's lineage, would be the Edomites. The Edomites were constantly trying to fight and kill the Israelites. That was just kind of the tension between the two. But interestingly, hundreds of years later, Herod comes from the line of Esau. He comes from that line, not the line of Israel, but the line of Esau. And so what we're going to see, he's trying to kill still the lineage of Jesus. He isn't even Jewish. Okay, he's married into a family that would legitimize the crown, but he was a wicked and evil and crazy person. The Jews did not trust him, but what he did was he finally won them over one day when he said, look, I want to build the grandest temple for all of you. And he did. The problem was that when Solomon built his original temple for God, he built it for God, for the people. For Solomon, he loved the presence of God. He couldn't wait for people to enjoy that. Unfortunately, Herod's temple, this temple that was added on from Ezra and Nehemiah's temple, he built it, expanded it, made it this big, beautiful building, but he did it to pacify the Jews. It had nothing to do with God. It was all about just positioning himself with the Jewish people. Herod built it for his own glory because Herod was a magnificent builder. He really was. But he was a crazy, fearful man. He was always afraid that someone was going to try to take his throne. This is how paranoid he was. Look at Matthew 2:13. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said. Take the child. So this is Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. The angel appears to Joseph and says, Joseph, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. This is how crazy he was. He hears a king is coming, and now he wants to kill the king at a baby. Verse 14, so he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. He was crazy. He just is going on a murderous rampage for little babies under 2 years old because he wants to do everything he can to get rid of this King Jesus that he's hearing about. Herod was crazy. He murdered his own wife. He murdered 2 of his sons. And if he thought you wanted his position, he would kill you. So Herod was working for the Roman government, but he was trying to appease the Jews. So this is what was going on at the time that Jesus would be born. Now, the Roman government ruled over Israel. They didn't care really about anything, but they wanted the Jews to pay their taxes. Herod is one of the most legendary architects, civilization of history in the world. He was brilliant. I'm going to show you a couple pictures here. This is in Caesarea. It's on the Mediterranean, and he had a palace there, and you can kind of see this is where it was at. But he built in the water out there. He literally built a man-made harbor. No one had ever really done that before. In Caesarea, he also built aqueducts to bring water in, to bring fresh water in. Here's a picture, Masada. This is down by the Dead Sea, southern Israel. And this was the last holdout for the Jews when Rome came in 70 AD and destroyed everything. And some of the Jews came to Masada. Today you can go up there. You just have to take a tram. I guess you can walk. I'm not doing that. I'm taking the tram. But that's what Herod was like. He was this builder. He built things. This was his world, and this was who was ruling in the time when Jesus would be born. Then in verse 5, we're introduced to a priest. Here you go. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah. Now, we're introduced to Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. Zechariah was a priest, okay? The Jewish priest would go to the temple, and they would actually work there. They would have certain times to work, and it was kind of a big deal to go there. At the time, there was about 18,000 to 20,000 priests. And they came from all over. Priests were in all different areas. So we meet Zechariah, and he wasn't a priest at a temple like in a big city, let's just say. We live in Arizona, and if you've ever heard of Quartzsite, Arizona, okay, it's this little teeny tiny town. Yeah, that would be kind of like where Zechariah would come from, this little nobody town. So what happens when you were a priest, because everybody worked, I think it was 2 weeks out of the year at the temple. So they divided these 18,000, priests, they subdivided them into 24 divisions. And then they were subdivided again, where about 150 would work at the temple at a time. And they would go to Jerusalem for 1 week, 2 times a year. And that would be their job, to minister in Herod's big, beautiful temple, okay? And what would happen when we get there, it's kind of like they'd roll the dice to see who would get to do the big jobs, okay? There was menial tasks that most of them did, but there was a couple really big jobs that everybody always wanted, and that was to go into this holy place. Now, the big job was to go into, and I'll put a picture of this right here. This is the place where they would go into you could be a priest that would trim the wicks on the lampstand of the menorah, you can see. Burn incense on a small altar, that was another one. there was this veil, as you can see that purple veil right there. It separated the most holy place from where some of the priests would be working. This was a big deal to go inside of the temple. But the interesting part is that the Holy of Holies, on the other side of that curtain, that's where the high priest went once a year. Nobody was ever allowed to go back there. So to get that close to that particular area was a big deal. And like I said, it's kind of like you roll the dice or you draw straws or whatever it is. And it's kind of like your one shot. One shot. Once you get to do this, you never get to do it again to go into there. It's kind of like you're done for life. I was thinking about that, like the Olympics, Michael Phelps. Most people go to the Olympics one time. It's like your one shot. Michael Phelps, I read he swam like 5 different Olympics. I'm like, okay, that's not how it was in Israel for these guys. So what we're going to do is pick that up next week, because Zechariah will come into the temple. He will get one of those coveted spots right near the Holy of Holies, and something amazing is going to happen that will make this silence of God, this 400 years of silence, stop. And now God is going to speak, and he's going to do it through an angel speaking to Zechariah. And he has an amazing something to tell him. And what he's going to tell him is what's going to happen next. And it's what everyone's been waiting for. The forerunner to Jesus will come on the scene. And if that means the forerunner of Jesus is coming, then that means the Messiah is not too far behind. So the lesson for today is this: when God is silent, he is still working. And relax, your grandkids and your children, your teenagers, will grow up someday. That's a promise. Anyway, have a really good day. See you next week.